Hi, welcome back to Seekers and Cynics. I'm Richard Bentley and this is Bodmin Road Church, and we've been looking at the relationship between faith and science, and this week I said I'd have a look at the whole question of miracles and whether science really rules out miracles and therefore dismisses the whole of the Christian faith. And before we start, we probably need to try a little bit of a definition of miracle, because the word does get used quite broadly, and sometimes I think Christians use it when they shouldn't. But what I'm talking about here by using the word miracle is hard miracle. Something, not just coincidence, but something that can only be explained supernaturally. Something that cannot have any explanation in the natural realm. Something that is clear indication of a supernatural force, God in Christian terms, stepping into our natural realm and doing something which would not otherwise have taken place. That's what I mean when I use the word miracle. There have been two objections really to that. The first has been on the grounds of science, that people will say that science rules out the supernatural, that the two are incompatible, that science rules out by definition, by law, anything supernatural. That, I suppose, is the primary objection that's made. If you hold that view, I have to say, with due respect, you have misunderstood science and the limits of science. Science cannot, and scientific law cannot philosophically rule out miracle, and any good scientist will tell you that, and certainly any philosopher of science will tell you that. The laws of science do not tell the universe what to do. They are not prescriptive, they are descriptive. The laws of science are very good, and they describe extremely well what the universe does on an average Wednesday afternoon, but they can only do that. They can only describe what normally happens in normal circumstances. The laws of science have no authority or power to say what could or could not happen. And therefore, if there is a supreme being, if there is a God, and I know that's an if still for some of you, the laws of science cannot tell him what he can and cannot do. That stuff, the possibility of miracle, is beyond scientific law. So it is simply not possible philosophically for science to rule out the miraculous. Science can say, well, you know what, if there's a claim to miracle, we should be skeptical. We should look at it very hard. We should think, hey, that doesn't fit with scientific law. It looks a bit unlikely. Absolutely fine. But the laws of science cannot say that did not happen. To find out whether something happens, we've got to do a different sort of investigation. We've got to interview witnesses. We've got to look at the evidence and the witness evidence for that claim. Science per se cannot say there is no miracle. The other objection that's been made to the miraculous generally has been that the people who claim these things are gullible, that the New Testament writers were gullible, and that people who claim miracles today tend to be uneducated, gullible, backwards sort of people. And yes, I have come across claims to the miraculous made perhaps by people who are gullible. But that's not the entire picture. The New Testament writers were intelligent people. I know they didn't have our scientific worldview, but they were nevertheless intelligent people. They knew what a con was, they knew what fake was, and they were not necessarily gullible. And there are many people today who would claim to have been witnesses to miracle who are not gullible people. In fact, there's a whole raft of people involved in the scientific method today. Scientists in many different fields who would say, A, that they believe miracle is possible in principle, and some of them who would say that they've had some first-hand experience of that for themselves. Those are not gullible people. So it's mistaken to write off the entirety of miracle evidence as purely coming from gullible people. That's actually a lazy argument, because it's simply not true, and it doesn't match with the facts. There are intelligent and scientific people who would put forward the case for miracle. I think the bottom line point is this, that if there is a God, and I know that's still an if for some of you, but if there is a God, it seems entirely rational to me, not irrational, but entirely rational to me to believe that he can, as and when, and it may be infrequent, but as and when he wishes, that he can intervene supernaturally in our natural world. That normally, of course, he leaves things to run according to natural processes of physics and biology and chemistry, because otherwise the world would be impossible to understand and impossible to live in. God needed to create a rational world with rational laws in order for us as rational beings to be able to live within it. But that baseline doesn't rule out the possibility of God, should he need to, intervening supernaturally on some occasion. That seems to me to be entirely plausible. And in fact, if Jesus Christ is God, as the New Testament claims, then should we not again rationally expect that to be evidenced with miracle? If Jesus Christ was God in the flesh upon this earth for a little while, then would we not expect there to be miracle accounts in his life? I would expect that as evidence of who he was. And indeed there are those accounts in the New Testament. And I have no reason to doubt the veracity of those accounts in the New Testament. The greatest of which, of course, is the resurrection. That Jesus Christ is raised from the dead. That claim is made in the New Testament. And if you approach that by saying, look, that can't have happened because science says that dead people cannot rise from the dead, then, as I said earlier, you've misunderstood the very nature of science itself. What science says is that dead people do not usually, normally come back from the dead. That is not possible naturally. That is not possible in normal circumstances. Of course it isn't. And that's what makes the claim to resurrection, to the resurrection of Jesus, it makes it interesting. If people could come back from the dead, well, there'd be nothing special about the claim to resurrection. Science says that doesn't normally happen in normal circumstances, by natural means. But if Jesus Christ was God himself, then we're not in the normal circumstances anymore, are we? We're not in the natural realm anymore. And there seems to me no reason why God should not and could not and did not, on that one occasion, on that unique occasion, when this was his son, raise him from the dead as proof that this was something different, that Jesus Christ was someone different, and that he was in fact God himself in the flesh. I have no problem believing that. Let me wrap this up. I accept miracles are not 10 a penny, and I'm not that sort of Christian that looks for that or expects that. Miracles by definition are rare. But just because science says they don't normally happen, and just because you may not have experienced one, should not give us grounds for dismissing the possibility entirely. And therefore, intellectually and rationally, I find there are no grounds to dismiss what's in the New Testament, and actually there are very good grounds to me and to a great many other people, including many scientists, for believing what is in the New Testament. Next time we will come to probably a much trickier area of creation, evolution, the origins of the universe. I think the potential conflict between Christianity and science there is much more complex and much harder to get our heads around, but we'll try and do that next time.